All right, ladies and gentlemen, today we sit down with Franklin Oliver, a prominent social studies and U.S. history teacher with over 15 years as an educator. We talk about the political climate that we currently live in, how that's impacted his own teaching style and his methods, how he can impact future generations going forward, and how we can try to be better to one another despite our party differences altogether. We also touch upon the national controversy of a rebuff Jesuit being disavowed by the Catholic Church for refusing to fire an openly gay teacher. So we had some video hiccups with this one, so bear with us. The audio recording should not be affected at all. But I hope you really enjoy this one. He had a lot of really interesting things to say, and it's really interesting hearing his perspective as an educator and as someone who studies social trends and that sort of stuff. What his thoughts are, obviously with 2016 and going forward, the political climate and all that sort of stuff, but just more in how we can go forward and help people moving forward. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Digital Fireside. I'm joined today with Franklin Oliver, an old personal favorite teacher of mine back at Brebeuf, the high school that I went to. And we're here just kind of talk. I wanted to get a better perspective on maybe teaching and sort of your interactions with students and how that has sort of changed and evolved over the years. And I thought that it was really, I always kind of admired you as a teacher. You were very outspoken. You kind of always spoke your mind. And I was kind of just curious, how someone like you sort of kind of operates within that sort of rule set of being a teacher and educating, kind of being there for children and that kind of stuff, and helping kind of improve, kids' lives. Because I think that, a lot of people...
that's the goal, at least.
You're right. Yeah, that is the objective, I would like to think. But anyway, so Franklin, thank you so much for joining us.
I'm really happy to be here, Alex. I appreciate the invitation. Appreciate the chance to explore some new space in beautiful Carmel, Indiana.
Yes.
I was really lost and struggled to find a parking spot because I didn't think, how about behind the buildings, hidden? we keep cars hidden here. It was fascinating.
And get a parking spot, too. I was thinking the same thing. Does no one work on a Tuesday in Carmel? You got people walking dogs. You got pushing strollers.
It's a little peculiar. Yeah. And actually, I should say before I even get started, I've left Brebeuf.
Right.
This fall, I'll be starting at University High School, which is technically in Carmel, so I have to get used to this.
Oh.
This is a brand new world for me.
Okay. I'm sure you will.
Good luck. Good luck.
I appreciate it.
Make sure you're driving 30 under.
Absolutely.
No
of course.
kidding.
I've had some conversations about that already.
Oh, my God. The kids are the worst.
I really have some expectations that I didn't know that I had when I started thinking about, okay, am I actually going to take this job? I'm technically not in Indianapolis anymore.
Right.
So that was fascinating to think about for myself. But in terms of what you were asking about, one of the things I really have valued about my job as a social studies teacher is that I actually have sometimes cause and at times, I guess you could say, excuses for talking about really important things that students don't necessarily have a chance to talk about or a space to talk about comfortably in other classes or in other places in their lives.
Right.
So one of the things I've been fortunate enough to do is to teach multiple elective classes. So some of those classes are things like sociology, the study of people in groups. Well, you can take that in so many different directions, and that's a really fascinating class, and one of the things I have always looked forward to being able to do as a classroom teacher. Okay, how can we explore these things that actually matter and connect with students in their real lives now and in the future? One of the classes I've taught consistently in the brick and mortar schools, but also online, is a class called Genocide and the Holocaust.
That's right.
And that's a really scary class to even say that as a name. Yeah. I hope people didn't automatically just decide they're not going to listen to the rest of this podcast by hearing that. But it's been fascinating in the past, I would say, 6 months or so, as folks have started talking about detention camps and concentration camps and internment camps.
Right.
I've had so many former students say, wait a second, I see some of this when we looked at the Stages of Genocide chart conducted by Human Rights Watch and Gregory Stanton and people who do this stuff professionally for a living. Some of this looks familiar. That's not a class I ever anticipated students would have to pay attention to in terms of their real lives.
Take notes. It's going to be
At
applicable.
least not in the United States. So we've historically talked about what's happening in Rwanda 20 years ago now, 25 years ago now, or what was happening in Darfur about 10 years ago. And all those things seemed really relevant at the time, but we didn't think we'd have to apply some of that language and some of those concepts and typologies to the United States. So, so that's been fascinating, kind of in the realm of elective classes. But one of the things I've also appreciated is that in a U.S. history class, we get to talk about the point and purpose of the American experiment. And as I've become a more comfortable teacher and am better at integrating content in lots of different ways, I've been able to have students kind of flesh out what it means for them to be an American. What concepts about the founding of America do we hold on to? Which have we maybe lost sight of? Which might not, which of those concepts might not seem as valid now as they did in the 18th century? And so that's a long way of saying I love my job because I get to do so much that connects not just with the past, but also with the present and at times even with the future.
Yeah.
So I have a question, though. When you're doing that, are you poking or kind of fishing for ideas that you already know people are going to bring up, so you want to talk about it more? Or is it something that you really just like, I kind of don't know what they're going to say, I just kind of want to know the field?
It's almost always the latter. If it's the former, then it's because there's a specific student who's come to me and said, Mr. Oliver, can we talk about this? This feels like it's an important thing, but I don't really know how to ask the question about it. And so if that happens, as it did a couple times last school year, then I try to figure out some way to bring in maybe an article or on a few occasions there's been a short video that we've been able to watch. And if kids don't want to participate in that kind of conversation, no problem. They don't have to. There's no pressure to do that. But I do want to give kids an opportunity. And that feels especially relevant because my previous school, Barov Jesuit, is a Jesuit Catholic high school. And we talk consistently about the notion of social justice and being good community members. Men and women for others is sort of the tagline that they use. And, well, how to say, the attempt doesn't happen nearly as often as the conversation about bringing in real life issues, engaging students in the world. We talk about doing that stuff all the time.
Yeah.
Some of us do it on a consistent basis, but it's hard to manage to have those kinds of conversations when you don't know what the answer is going to be, when you don't know who might feel a certain way or have a certain perspective. What's great about my classes, at least I hope this is true, is that I work really hard at the beginning of the semester, every semester, to set situations up so that students understand that disagreement isn't negative. That disagreement is almost always constructive.
Yeah.
And if it's intended in that vein, it can be really, really productive. So the notion of students having a perspective and I agree with it or I disagree with it, that part doesn't really matter so much to me because I want them to all discover what they believe, what they care about. And I think the best way of actually doing that is, and I guess this is such a cliche, but in the marketplace of ideas. You have to have that free exchange. And I'm in a position where I can help produce that kind of marketplace, which is wonderful.
Yeah. In an ideal world, like obviously you can't predict who's going to say what and what's going to impact other students. So you have that cross conversation. But like an ideal world, you'd want to say like, you want to have all that happen without them losing respect for each other. Because, when someone has a disagreement or has a different opinion, for some reason that just triggers your mind like, oh, well, now I don't respect you, which is kind of a weird phenomenon if you think about it.
It is.
To where
It
like
is.
you're trying to preach this message of we can all have this conversation, just understand where we are, understand who you are. But it doesn't mean that anyone's necessarily wrong here. Maybe we don't know all the information about this, so no one can really be wrong yet. And so it's hard for, I guess, for someone in your situation or your standing to get younger people to understand that, which is kind of, condemnable.
One of the ways I try to get that set up, and I don't think I was doing this when you were in my class, Alex. I don't think I had this exposure yet, there's an organization called Teaching Tolerance, and they have some great, really constructive ideas for how to help engage students in conversation. One of the things they do is called a disagreement activity. And the short version is basically that students physically move themselves from 1, I 100% agree with this, to 10, I 100% disagree, or maybe it's like and hate, something along those lines. So for me, and I always model this, I get up and walk in through the classroom. So if the prompt that I give is Ku Klux Klan, then I'm going to be at 1, because I hate the Klan almost as much as they hate me. If it's summer vacation, then I'm going to walk all the way to 9, because I really like summer vacation.
Right.
So students see, okay, there's a range of disagreements. We're not going to talk about it. We're just going to physically move ourselves. So then I give them between 15 and 20 different prompts, and it ranges from Tom Brady to Taylor Swift to bananas to cats. Kids move in lots of different directions. Kids go from place to place to place. I toss in a couple that kids don't necessarily know anything about. So John Coltrane is almost always one that I use, because there are occasionally kids that know John Coltrane, most don't know. So where they move or stay where they are is fascinating. And what I talk with them about as we debrief is that we've had disagreements about all this stuff, 20 different things, and there was no one who had exactly the same pattern of movement. But that's fine. And later on, we're going to have disagreements about things that actually matter and things that are a lot more complicated than whether or not you like bacon.
Right. Yeah.
Because if you like bacon and you went to a 10, that's fantastic. But you probably don't think anything negative about me who's at a 1 because I'm a vegetarian.
Okay.
You probably don't really hold that against me. But that's something as simple as a food choice. So when it comes to something that's actually complicated and involves real-life human emotions, of course we're going to have disagreements. And they're going to be just as fine as me being at a 1 for bacon and you being at a 10 for bacon.
Yeah.
So
Understanding.
that's the kind of task that we do at the very beginning, just to set up the recognition that disagreement doesn't have to be uncomfortable or problematic.
It's really interesting, because I think I do remember doing that sort of exercise in your class. Because I was a sophomore at the time, and this must have been 2007, 2006. Keep in mind, I'm very, very old.
Yeah.
So,
What? A little louder, Sonny.
but
Damn kids.
that's really interesting. That because I was attracted to that class initially, because you go through like the curriculum of classes you could take throughout the next year, and you're like, okay, you got like Algebra 2, geometry, genocide, and the Holocaust. Like that kind of just pops out a little bit. So I was like, all right, well, shit, I'll take that class. And I remember it being a very interesting class, and I remember just kind of hearing you talk about just your own, experiences and that sort of stuff. And I remember there was something that stuck with me, is that and this was 2006, 2007, I remember you saying back at the time that you considered yourself a feminist, and you were openly outward spoken about that.
Yeah.
And that was something that, to me, at that point in time, very few people were talking about that, at least in my kind of circle or whatnot. That very few people, it was before it kind of became, I don't want to say in vogue, because it makes it seem trendy, but it
became trendy. There's a lot of things that happened in this 10-year, 13-year span.
Yes.
Where it's
So
this is what it is. Yeah.
that it was like, oh my God, he was on to something back then, right? So it's like, because I didn't really understand what feminism was. Granted, I was 15 at the time, so I had a very narrow worldview. I'd been in private schools my entire life. It was something that I wasn't maybe exposed
Speak
to.
for yourself.
And in
buddy.
2007.
Speak for yourself. Okay, I've been in private schools too.
The way people talked about feminism was basically Rush Limbaugh.
Right.
He was the only person that was using feminism on a regular basis in American culture.
Right. I think it kind of hadn't entered that political kind of climate yet. It wasn't a hot topic issue. It wasn't anything like that. And I just remember you kind of being, I want to say, ahead of the curve in that kind of sense, where you were kind of exposing us to these different ideas that we would face almost immediately, at least for me, kind of like graduating high school, getting out into the real world and going to college and being exposed to all these different ideologies and all that sort of stuff. And I think I would just love to hear how that has in terms of just like you teaching this class in 2006, 2007, how that has started to change opposed to like a decade later, your last year teaching it, when maybe some of the stuff is more at the forefront. Because I think that exercises like that, Educational experience is like where you say how much you like bacon or something
Yeah.
like that. I didn't even make that connection until you were talking about it just now, and then it starts to make more sense because I feel like I generally, on a lot of issues, I kind of can see, I have a sort of empathy that I find is becoming more and more rare these days in terms of like,
probably right.
okay, I may not agree with you, but I can
Sure.
sort of see maybe where you're
understand.
coming from. Right. So
Trevor
like,
Noah says that all the time. Like, I understand it.
Yeah.
I don't agree with it, but I can
Yes,
understand it.
yes.
because I think that some people just like to paint people because it's easier as good evil done, and like not
Absolutely.
even like, okay, well, you're a Republican, you must be evil, right? Because you automatically endorse all this kind of stuff, and like I can sort of see maybe, and I think that was largely in part in my education. I think it was a large part of my formative sort of process where I can maybe kind of follow the trail and see and maybe empathize, not agree with, but empathize with some of these sort of traits, and then utilizing that, be able to construct arguments or debates or something like that where, I can maybe reach that person better.
That's a really good point. And actually, the class I teach where that sort of idea comes through the most is sociology, because there are 4 primary sociological frameworks, and these theoretical frameworks are basically how analysis gets done. Mm-hmm. So if you're someone who focuses on the conflict perspective, then you're going to analyze social systems through the lens of conflict or competition, coercion, all those sorts of things, and that's what you're really going to focus on. Well, not everything probably has the most accurate reading through the conflict perspective. So maybe there's some other lens that you should use. Mm-hmm. Maybe you'll want to use the interactionist lens instead. And part of my, I guess you could say, academic training is to figure out which lens to use. That helps me in lots of other ways too, because it's not just about sociology. It can be applied to politics, or maybe an issue like abortion or immigration, where there are lots and lots of different perspectives, and depending on the lenses that you're using, you're going to see very, very different things. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The trouble, of course, is that most folks have only one pair of eyes and refuse to even momentarily try on anyone else's lenses. Mm-hmm. That's the hard part, and that's part of what I think is so difficult about having important conversations in America right now, because it is very clearly that you're a good person or you're a bad person. It's dichotomous thinking. It's left, right, good, bad. And that notion of nuance, or at least empathy, maybe I don't agree with you, but I'm going to try to explore this from your perspective to see if I can understand a little bit more. There's very, very little of that.
Yes, I 100% agree. And you see it on these, you see it online all the time. I think that, I don't want to go to another social media rant because Luke is sick of these, but I think it's
by all means
probably the most damaging thing. It may have irrevocably ruined our entire generation in retrospect. I might go as far as to say that, because you have all these insulated pockets of people in these vast echo chambers that they just fester and grow and grow and grow and grow, and then it's easier to dismiss arguments in 140 characters or less. It's easier to summarize things, gloss over these little nuances.
No, I don't think it's easier. It's just now in the forefront. I think this stuff
because
happened
it is easier.
when he was growing up. I think it was the same thing. You just didn't hear it because it was all right across the world.
Maybe
now it's just not. It was happening. It's just that you couldn't see it from yourself. Like, you had to believe someone else from another town that's like, yeah, this is what's happening over there. Oh, really? Word? That's what people think.
Yeah,
that's what's happening. But I don't think it's necessarily, like you said. Maybe it's easier to have the access to it, but I don't think the actual action of it didn't ruin our generation. I think it's just it could make people more aware.
There was an article published today that depression and suicide attempts are the highest they have been since World War II. So
all that,
just throwing that out there, and I think social media is a large part of that. Anyway,
that's pretty nice.
Wow. That's horrifying.
Isn't it though? So I guess, what is the difference that you've observed between this, from taking your class a decade ago to now? What are some of the things that you notice that are different between the students, how they interact? Obviously everyone's kind of glued to their phones a lot more, but
they really are. Probably 5 years ago, I walked into my classroom.
Trying to sneak that.
I walked into my classroom, and there were probably 3 minutes between my arrival and the start of the next period, there were 7 or 8 kids in class. None of them were actually talking with each other. They were all looking down at their phones.
Really?
And this was a few years ago. I took a picture because I was so amazed. And every once in a while, I look back at that picture and think, it must be so much worse now. It must be so much worse now. What you said about the echo chamber,
Yeah.
part of the echo chamber is simply the fact that we choose to follow folks that are like-minded.
Right.
In a very consistent way. Yeah. So it's important for me that I actually follow the National Review because it's a reputable conservative site. They have lots of perspectives that I don't agree with, and I'm a better person for understanding why they believe what they believe. That helps. I think for most folks, it's hard to even figure out what those other perspectives are. We don't see them. We don't have very good models for folks saying, oh, well, if you really want a different perspective on this, wait a second, why would I want a different perspective? I want to confirm what I already know.
You get that endorphin rush. It makes me feel good to
course.
agree with that.
Of course. Of course. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. One of the other things I've noticed, and this is, I suppose, a sad commentary on folks in my profession as well as social media more generally, is that fewer and fewer students are capable of constructing real-life paragraphs. What you were saying about 140 characters, 280 characters, well, that's the way kids learn to write now.
Oh, Jesus.
Kids don't learn to write in paragraphs. And the notion of constructing full-fledged essays is very difficult for a lot of students. And between Brebeuf and now university, I teach some of the smartest, best educated kids in central Indiana. And if these kids are struggling so mightily, I wonder what kids who have less opportunity and less access to...
Who are expected of the same things expected of them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And when they get to college...
Oh, boy.
Again, those expectations rise that much more.
Man.
Yeah.
So I guess, have you noticed maybe take for example, maybe that sort of, that exercise we were talking about, the bacon, and
Sure.
standing on different sides of the classroom or whatnot. Have you noticed any kind of difference between maybe doing that again a decade ago and almost to now? Is there more aversion to arguing with people or more agreeable?
What's helpful about that exercise is that I do it on the first, second, or third day of the semester.
Oh, wow, okay.
So lots of kids don't know each other yet, and they have no idea what we're really doing. So I explain it very vaguely at the beginning of class, but not with any real detail. It's harder and harder for kids not to talk during the activity now. And 10 years ago, there was virtually no talking. Every once in a while, someone would say, "Are we at 6?" They'd want to make sure they were doing it right.
Yeah.
They want to make sure they were at the right number. Now, there's a lot more conversation, a lot more, really?
You don't
And a
know.
surprise.
Peer pressure, you think, almost? Or
I think they have very little experience being in a group and having to be quiet.
Huh.
Because even in class, there's not an expectation of quiet in the same way that there used to be.
And what mean? Like, which way do you mean that?
More often, probably more often than ever before, kids are doing multiple different kinds of things at the same time. In a sense, it almost reminds me of the, I don't know if you've ever seen Little House on the Prairie. It's probably the best example I can think of a one-room schoolhouse. There's one teacher and kids in lots of different grades doing lots of different things simultaneously.
Right.
Well, with the advent of technology at schools like Brebeuf, where everyone is expected to have
Like iPad,
Yeah.
computers, all that. Yeah.
bring your own technology. You have your device that's connected to the internet. What that means as a teacher is that students can be doing lots of different things simultaneously. Now, sometimes there's a class period where I really ask everyone to be on the same page for the whole period, and we need to get through this specific material, or we're watching something together. But lots and lots of class time is spent with students actually constructing whatever work it is. Either they're researching something, or maybe some kids are working on a bibliography. Maybe some kids are already at the stage where they're writing sentences. for this assignment that they're doing, and that's fine, and often it's really wonderful. But it also means that when there's actually a time when everyone needs to be quiet and together, that feels a little weird, feels a little jarring, especially in an hour-long class. That's pretty tough. So the notion of a quiet attention span, that's fading.
We used to do that, but just we didn't have the actual, technology. We just had the books that you had to do whatever work you say. Okay, we're gonna have like a free period. Everyone do your own thing, but for this class.
Okay.
So like we all had a research paper. We're all doing different things, looking up different stuff, but you're all together, quiet, not being distracting or anything like that. But that's it.
And that felt comfortable?
It felt, well, not for me, no. Like, I was just kind of like out the window, just kind of staring. But no.
But not bothering anybody.
But I know a lot of the students were just kind of like, all right, this is our time to actually, because I know I'm not going to do it. I didn't think this way. I thought about this like in college, not in high school.
Okay.
This is how I thought in college. But the kids were way ahead of the curve. I went to Cathedral, and so they were way ahead of the curve, so they just like knew, all right, this is my time because I know I'm not going to do it when I get home. I'm going to do it. I was just like, I'll probably get it done later. Sure. And I just
Naruto, Toonami-san.
Relax.
So that is an interesting thought that you bring up too. But,
Well, so I know we're running, at least for Luke, we're running a little bit on time here, but I did want to get into.
Excellent transition.
Yeah, speaking of where Luke went to high school.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so both schools have actually been at the forefront of the country in the past few weeks.
Really though, yeah.
Yes.
Indiana, man.
And Luke went to Cathedral, and we were buff people. So I guess, what was your perspective? I guess because I knew Layton Elliot, and great teacher, fantastic teacher. He was like, and again, up there with you, with one of my favorites, and I'd love to have him on at some point. But
my guess is he's going to have an agent soon.
Yeah, probably.
Or at least a lawyer.
Yeah.
Making sure he says only specific
Just
things.
sitting like right in the back. He's like, no, you can't really talk about that.
We're going to cut that.
Sorry. Yeah, got to cut that. Sorry.
Well, I also love Layton.
Yeah.
And my son graduated 2016. He was a cross-country guy, and Layton was one of the people that really helped my son transition to Brebeuf from large public middle school. We live about 45 minutes away from Brebeuf, so it was really hard for Jake to think, you know what, I'm actually going to have friends here and be connected because I'm not going to see these people. Layton really made a valuable difference in my son's life, and if for no other reason, I'm Team Layton all the way. For me, the really important thing is not this specific moment, because who knows what's going to happen legally, and Lord knows I hope that Josh gets lots and lots of money and gets a new job really quickly.
Right.
From everything I've heard, he's an excellent teacher as well, and he's a really good person. I'm hoping that this is a moment that opens Pandora's box and allows all the sins of the Catholic Church to fly out into the world for public consumption.
Yeah. It's about time.
Because the reality is pretty straightforward. Layton and Josh have been married for a little while now, a couple of years.
Yeah.
Everyone involved knew that. That wasn't a secret. It wasn't a problem. But it wasn't public knowledge.
What made it public?
Facebook.
Yeah.
Oh.
Status change.
Social media, see?
Yes. And this is the kind of reality that the Catholic Church has been running and hiding from. They were fine with having a married gay teacher until everyone knew about it. And that was the change that happened. It became public information.
Right.
Now, I'm hoping that in the bigger sense, this allows folks to start paying attention to the reality that the Catholic Church simply doesn't believe that all human beings are equal.
No,
Yeah.
There are clear hierarchies in that church. Straight people are better than gay people. Men are better than women. Catholics are better than non-Catholics. And I talked about this a little bit on my podcast, the Whodeanny pod, probably 2-3 weeks ago. So for folks who've already heard me say this, sorry. It's worth hearing again. One of the largest religious institutions in the world, and certainly one of the most powerful, has hierarchies of human beings. We don't talk about it that way. We don't think about it that way. But that's exactly what's happening. And I defy anyone to disagree with that statement, because you really can't disagree with it. It's apparent and true and horrible. And so I'm hoping that, despite the pain that this is causing for Layton and Josh and their families, that this really does start a much broader conversation.
Yeah.
And that the attempt to close Pandora's box will be met with ridicule. That seems to be the only thing that's actually going to make a change.
Yeah.
So nothing with the schools themselves. Like, you think they did their part in it and just kind of handled it the way they could have, or is there something more
I think Cathedral probably took the path of least resistance.
Well, yeah. I mean,
This
they
is
were
a
kinda
short-term
mafia
public
boss,
relations.
strong-arm there too. So it's kind of like
This is a short-term public relations problem. But I would be shocked if more than a handful of students don't come back next year as a result.
You really think so? Well, I mean, I know personally from me going there, and I recently graduated, so 13. I graduated in 13,
Okay.
so I kind of had the feeling of like the people who were there still. And I know in the 4 years I was there, we saw a lot of people who were, gay or not there. And I feel like, do you think like all those students they don't feel welcomed anymore, or they feel like now they're gonna be judged? Now before, like maybe they were silently judged. I don't know. They didn't know though. Or maybe they didn't care.
I think
but now
it's
that
the
it's out in
elephant
the
in the room
front,
with
now
that
it's there.
stuff.
Now it's like I'm awkward. I'm in this space. People know. I'm gonna
I
get out
think
of
it
here.
might impact admissions for the next year or so. But in terms of students who are already at Cathedral, who've already
Establish friends
it's so hard to leave.
oh yeah.
It's so hard to leave. And are you going to leave and say, well, I'm going to go to Ritter instead?
Oh no.
Or Cena instead?
Yeah,
You're going to go to Rebuff or Park Tudor or University, I guess. But that's a massive change.
That's true.
And if you're going, are you going and sort of waving your freak flag that much faster? Hey, everybody, look at me. I left Cathedral. Obviously, I'm here because I'm queer. Feels like a big ask of a high school student.
Yeah. Jesus.
Feels like a big ask.
See, I mean, I know a lot of my classmates were taken to Facebook and like a little bit, not a little bit, they were really upset about the decisions
Sure.
that was made and stuff.
Oh,
But-
yes.
And that goes back to what we were saying. Is like I understand Cathedral's decision. I don't agree with it, but at the same time, I do believe that they were kind of strong-armed. I don't think. I mean, they had to keep their status. I mean, there's a lot of things that go on there to where I think they value, because Cathedral is all about tradition, and that's like
Yes.
what they live and die by.
Absolutely.
And so you can't really go back on what you preach on, and not just Catholic, but just like the school itself is held up on tradition. Alumni, people who love it,
You're
what they
100%
do
right.
every year.
And that's part of what makes all this feel so problematic to me. It's the institution valuing the institution more than the
Over the
people in
person
the
who
institution.
make it
Yeah.
an institution.
Yes.
That's true.
And that's hard. That's why I commend Brebeuf, even though I'm not there anymore. I don't really have a dog in this fight in some important senses. Brebeuf did the much harder thing
Yeah.
by choosing to do what they believe is the right thing, as opposed to the simple or easy thing. And that's a really tough task.
But were they nonprofit? Were you guys already have? Were you guys really a
They're all
Catholic school
nonprofit.
though?
Yes.
So you guys could serve Eucharist at Mass and stuff?
Yes.
Okay.
There are lots of, I want to say legal, but have administrative elements within the Catholic Church. So the Jesuits are a separate organization in some senses. So the Jesuits are still there. The Jesuits can still perform all their priestly functions. And the Jesuit organization nationally is fighting against this, fighting against these policies. They want to be able to allow gay married faculty
See,
to
yeah.
continue serving there.
That's what you're supposed to. I mean, like, I think that's what you're supposed to do. I mean, that's just because what I was saying about the tradition with the cathedral is that you traditions don't stand the test of time because time changes, things change around it. So you can't uphold all these old traditions that you have. No matter it's going to end at some point, and at some point, someone's got to say, okay, we got to change it a little bit, until it becomes the new thing, becomes a norm. And so I don't get why Cathedral was the one that just didn't, agree with what Ruff was doing. Kind of like this could have been like a way to really start like not a revolution, but like a renaissance.
And I think the notion of Renaissance is really scary.
Oh yeah, no,
It's
people do
really
not like
scary.
that, especially
No.
for old timey.
Yes.
places like Cathedral.
Did Brebeuf take that first? Was Brebeuf the
Brebeuf
first
was
one?
first, yeah.
Okay.
And then like the very next week, and then
Yikes.
and because they were together, so like that they came.
I could understand
Back
more
to
maybe
back.
if Cathedral was put on the spot first with that, but it seems like they already kind of had that
There's
domino
a
effect
model.
going for it. You know,
Yeah.
it's like probably wouldn't be as big of a deal. Well, whatever. But so I guess beyond that, like for people
May I
who
say
don't,
one other thing?
Sure,
about this?
sure.
This has been part of a longer conversation that's been going on for a couple years. And I know that Brebeuf has been working really hard behind the scenes quietly for a couple years, changing some of their HR language, specific policy, anticipating that at some point there was going to be a public acknowledgement
Right.
of the situation. Now, I have no idea what Cathedral had been doing, what kind of groundwork they might have been laying. I just don't know about that part. So I want to be fair about this.
I mean, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for other people to give some more context as well. So because the Archdiocese disavowed Brebeuf,
Right.
I mean, I'm sorry, yes, disavowed Brebeuf and Cathedral kind of kowtowed to them. Is there any kind of monetary value as well that they are losing out on because of that, or is it strictly just here you can't practice this, or whatever? I'm trying to think of reasons why Cathedral would want to kind of fall in line in that sort
I'm
of
telling you,
regard.
it's the tradition.
Just the tradition. There's
I'm
no
gar-
other. You don't think there's any other like monetary benefit?
No, because
of
like you
being-
said, there's stuff people knew.
Really?
People knew. He was not coaching. He's been teaching there for 13 years, man.
Yeah.
People knew, and there's people who come in there who are gay, who go about their lives and leave and are great alumni and do great things. Like this is not like a new concept. Maybe if it was like the 80s, 90s.
Yeah.
This has been going on for a while. They know, like he says, we don't know what was going on in the department about this, but like how they're gonna deal with it, because there's people in my class too who went through like transitions and did all that stuff too, and people just like, okay, like that's your choice. Like there was no like sense of, that's why people in my grade were so like shocked about it.
Yeah.
It's because they're like, well, we saw you guys be that lifelong connections, traditional kind of school that accepts everybody, but now here is it when it's public, it's time to be that. You guys are running away from it.
Yeah.
That's
Which
exactly right.
they were confused about and enraged about. And so like I can see their point, but at the same time there's like, Cathedral's like, oh, I don't know what to do. I mean, like,
So it
what
almost
do you
sounds
want us
like
to do? Like,
maintaining their tradition meant betraying their values.
right.
That's a really
It's a weird thing to say.
Yeah.
Especially to something that, especially in Central Indiana, that's very revered. Like,
Yes.
Like now, when you say that, it's gonna be like, oh, you went.
He went to a cathedral.
Because I don't really have much of an attachment to my high school at all, really.
I do really.
Like,
don't.
I
I mean,
don't-
aside from the few classes I've taken.
So like I kind of have like a pretty straightforward look on it. So
Okay.
I don't feel that way about Cathedral, but I can understand why people really, really wish they had gone the other way with that. And I don't know. I mean, there's so much more I want to say, but yeah, I'm going to be
Okay.
ready to go here.
I
But
don't
there's
wanna
so
take
much
up-
because what they do in a situation like this, like how are you going to like not backpedal, but like how are you going to recover from this? Like yes, Cathedral will still be a great school, still have great people. Like there's no ill will wished upon them, but they kind of
Sure.
they oofed, and so they goof.
Yeah.
They goof. So it's like what are you gonna? The next 5 years might have some impact with them. I was surprised in 2020 they come out with something that tries to
You think they'll walk
include
back on
people.
that?
I think they will, but it's gonna be too late, and the people's trust has already been broken. I
can
think
maybe
they're going
see
to
that.
try. Like, they're going to see an effect. Like you said, there's going to be people who will leave there. There's going to be an effect on it, and they're going to be like, "Oh crap! Like, was it really worth it to stay a part of this archdiocese?" Like,
Yeah.
in a progressive world where you even have the Pope saying back and forth whether or not it's good or bad. Like, you can't just straight up say, "Oh nope, this is what it is, black and white."
Yeah.
Like no, like it's not black and white anymore. People accept that it's gray now. It's
Yeah.
like you have to transition. You have to learn with the times as well. And people for some reason aren't, taking that leap yet. And it's for everything. Like it's going to repeat itself over and over. It's going to take think about it. The world is not ready. I guess the world is not ready for like each group that comes along. So like first it was black people. We're still not ready for black people. But now we're on our way out. People are getting tired. Like we don't care about your problems anymore. We're getting on our way out. Now it's the gay
We're
people
8
who
years
are
in power.
right, and now it's the gay people, and then soon the gay people will be like, people will get tired of them and burnt out of them, and then it's gonna be the trans people. It's just, I don't know. Like I feel like it's just gonna keep repeating, and people are gonna get burnt out by these groups, and I don't know how people are gonna deal with it. I really don't. When I'm 50, we'll see if this is even.
We should still do
If
digital
this,
fireside.
if this is even
You
a
won't
story.
believe what these damn kids are doing. All right, Luke.
But yeah.
We've kept you a little bit long. I'd like to stay and talk with you till 2, if that's all right.
Yeah.
I still have some more questions for you just in general about teaching and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. But it was a pleasure talking to you guys. Pleasure meeting you.
Yeah.
Likewise, thank you.
Yeah, it's a good
I really
conversation.
appreciate this.
Luke, where can they find you on social media?
You can find me at Indie Chubbs. It's with 2 B's.
2 B's.
On Twitter and Instagram, and the Digital Fireside
Are you
on Instagram.
Are you doing stuff on the Instagram?
I am doing stuff on the Instagram.
Okay.
He just doesn't like it.
He doesn't give me anything to post.
He thinks it's damaging to his generation. That's what it was.
These damn kids ruining
Use it
everything.
to promote yourself. Don't use it to.
That is interesting though, because unrelated, that kind of like way back to our conversation. Like, I first started the technology implementation. First started like when I was a senior, where like Cathedral provided iPads for everybody. I didn't take it. Like, you could choose to take it or not, but I was like, I don't know, because you have to give it back afterwards.
Sure.
But at the same time, like now it's like what he's saying, that you bring your own, which is like more college stuff. And I'm
Yeah.
just like, man, these kids, man, they're getting young,
These youngsters.
getting so much
they
shit
have it.
early.
All right. Well, we're going to take a quick break here. I'm going to get something to drink, and we will continue back momentarily. Okay. If you're ready, we can just kind of
Yeah,
go
absolutely.
back into that.
No sweat.
All right. Well, awesome. Now that we're back here, I did kind of want to talk to you a little bit more, just maybe about going forward with stuff and actions that maybe we could be cognizant of or keep in mind to help do our own part in maybe raising or nurturing the next sort of generation, mentoring the next generation in terms of productive sort of discord. So I think that, whether you voted for him or not, I think that our president does not set good examples on how to debate.
Sure.
I think that is maybe not a Republican or Democratic issue. I think that's kind of in my opinion, like...
It's very personality driven.
Yes. So like you see this sort of boisterous, very my way or the highway.
Yes.
I'm ignoring anything that causes dissent or whatnot, or that sort of thing. And I'm wondering, what kind of cascading ramifications could this have towards our youth of tomorrow or whatnot, or Gen Z or whatever you want to call them? I mean, how do you see that
To be
reflected?
honest, it's really scary. And fortunately, I see it almost not at all in my students.
Oh,
Where I see it is in the culture at large. And I don't know the statistics off the top of my head, but the Southern Poverty Law Center has a hate watch group. And one of the things they do is basically track hate groups and hate incidents. And since Trump was elected, the number of hate incidents has risen dramatically. The number of hate groups has also risen dramatically. Lots of those people are buoyed not just by believing that the president sides with them, and his comments of this weekend about the squad is a great reflection of that.
Yeah.
But his notion after Charlottesville that there were good people on both sides of the Charlottesville protest that ended in the death of Heather Heyer. I'm sorry. It's not a death. She was murdered. Someone ran her over with their car. Those folks are incredibly emboldened by this president. And my fear is that folks on the left are going to believe that they have to respond in the same kind of fashion. They have to be as loud and, how about we say, consistent as possible. Really what I mean is unyielding to factual information. Holding on to a position regardless of its validity.
Yes.
And that would be really scary because at the moment there are still some adults in the room, politically, culturally. There are still some adults, but the person with the biggest microphone isn't one of them. And that's a brand new reality for the United States. We've simply never had that before.
That was the interesting thing to me, because you're seeing that not just on the Republican side now, but you're seeing that in the Democratic debates where I want to say, you're familiar with Andrew Yang?
Yes.
I think he was like one of the few candidates in that primary debate to respect the rules in terms of like, let's not interrupt, let's not go over time.
Yes.
And there's like a graph that shows the amount of public speaking each candidate had, and he was like at the dead last. So like I feel like we are being shown and taught that, following the rules and that sort of stuff is doesn't win. It
It's
doesn't
for
get you
losers.
results. It's for losers. Yes. So like, and I think with that stuff that Trump has said about all that stuff, I'd like to think that he's not making that comparison that these crazy alt-right people are good, but that he misspoke. But again, it's so...
Except that we know he didn't misspeak, and he had multiple opportunities to walk it back, and because he doesn't walk it back.
He doesn't.
And in that
That's his
sense, that's
personality.
consistency.
Yes.
He's going to stay with something regardless of whether it actually makes sense for him to do it.
Because it's perceived as weakness.
Yes,
He's not willing
because
to
it's perceived
compromise.
as
He's
weakness.
not willing to admit
Yes.
that he was wrong or vulnerable and that sort of thing.
That's the malignant narcissist in him.
Yeah. And I think that is teaching, it's showing, unfortunately, that in this capitalist society in the United States of America, that unfortunately gets you results.
Yes.
And, that... we talked about this about a week or two ago with this YouTuber. I mean, look, we're talking about this that unfortunately committed suicide, and he was dealing with a lot of mental stuff. And I said it last time that we are seeing this phenomenon of these young men that would rather die than admit that they have a weakness or admit that they need help and they need a helping hand, because our society. Is it the role models? Is it the leaders in our society that are saying that is? Is it cultural? Is it our media? I'm just trying to find the causation for some of this stuff.
I think it's deeply cultural, and unfortunately, we also live in a culture, and I don't know about how this particular YouTuber managed to kill himself, but historically, at least over the last 25 years or so, the incidence of suicide attempts has been slightly more female than male, but the rate of successful suicides is dramatically more male. Yes, because men use guns.
Yes,
men have access to guns, and it's overwhelming. It's absolutely overwhelming. Probably 2 weeks ago, I saw that for the first time in decades, I believe since the beginnings of World War II, the American life expectancy has actually gone down.
Wow.
And it's a combination of suicides and overdoses. And that combination really seems to signal that we're living in times of a deeply dysfunctional society. And you're exactly right. People struggle so desperately to even ask for help.
Yeah.
And then if you have to ask multiple times, what does that say about you? What kind of labels do we use? They're
Right.
almost all negative.
Right.
And particularly as a male, we gender weakness in so many subtle and unsubtle ways that I can't imagine how much harder it must be for males, even than females, to say, yes, I have to get help. I can't do this independently.
And we were talking about that even last episode too, is that, for me, again, not being a woman, I have a very one-sided view of this sort of issue. So when, toxic masculinity, a woman talks about toxic masculinity, they may see a completely different side that I'm oblivious to, and I'll respect that. But for me, what I perceive as toxic masculinity is this John Wayne, gung-ho, uncompromising, drinks like a fish, smokes all the time, and just this it's not realistic. It's not attainable. It's not emulatable in any kind of real way. And I think that is so damaging to our society. And we have this this phenomenon of it's like that, again, what I was talking about earlier is kind of a half joke, but the social media stuff almost ruining a generation. It's like you see people all the time on social media only at their best.
Of course.
And so you feel inadequate. You always have to measure up. So then you only post stuff at your best. And it just is this crazy cyclical cycle because, I see alumni. We've got our 10-year reunion coming up. And I see, alumni and that kind of stuff from my class that, I've heard stuff going on. I'm not going to name names, but I've heard some stuff going on. But, you take a look at their Facebook. All smiles.
Looks perfect, doesn't
everything
it?
looks perfect. Yep. Idealistic even.
Yep.
And, I just wonder what that is doing to our society. We're all in this alone together in a weird way. We're so isolated.
That's a great phrase. That's a great phrase.
It's crazy.
Yes. Probably 10 years ago, PBS did a program, I think it was Frontline, called Generation Like. That was all about how adolescents, these are people right in your age group,
Yeah.
have discovered the new currency isn't about how many dates you can have. It's not about what car you drive. It's about how many people like your social media post. And it's absolutely fascinating to see the lengths that people go to attain more likes. Yeah. And this was 10 years ago.
Oh,
now,
God.
now smartphones are ubiquitous.
Yeah.
And there's so many different filters that people use. There have been occasions where I've seen people on social media feeds and I thought, I wonder who that is. Mm-hmm. Then I saw the name and thought, oh, that's not what that person looks like.
Yes. Oh my gosh. There's a whole I love Reddit. So
okay.
There's this whole subreddit called Instagram Reality where basically they show like they have like this like it's a meme where it's like, profile picture versus like your tagged picture.
Yeah.
Totally different.
Yeah.
But the natural progression of this is really interesting to watch, and because I dated this Instagram influencer. She was like paid to like sponsor fitness stuff or whatever a while ago, and I said this before on the podcast, but she would delete posts if they didn't get enough likes, no matter how much she personally was invested and thought this picture meant something.
Sure.
If she didn't see that magical number go up, wasn't interested in it. She's like, oh, I hate it. It's so crazy how this works. And if you've seen the recent stuff with, have you heard of like deep fakes before?
Yes.
Have you seen the one they just posted this where they put Jim Carrey in the place of Jack Nicholson in The Shining? And it is eerie. It is eerie how well it is. And this is some amateur guy doing this. Yeah.
That's very creative.
Well, like, I wonder now, and this is me just like to theorize and all that kind of stuff, like, because it's the writer in me. But like, do we reach this sort of like apex, this sort of crazy point where people, it just like we have this also almost like massive rejection of what we see online because it's like, oh, well, that's a deep fake, or no, that's not real. So you almost get like, I mean, I can't wait for the presidential attack ads of 2024 or something like that when the deep fake stuff is like readily available.
Yes.
You get, Trump.
It might all be fake news.
Yeah. Well, that's the scariest
It really
thing.
might be.
So, I mean, it's basically been your job for a while to kind of look at these different societal trends and just how this stuff sort of evolves, and like, where in the world do you see all this going? Like, not even a decade, half a decade from now. Like,
and that's part of the scary part because the technology advances so quickly and can be applied in so many different ways for good and for ill.
Right.
That I have absolutely no idea what's coming down the horizon.
Is that exciting or is that terrifying?
Yes. Yes, it is. I try really hard to be optimistic.
Yes.
And know that there are always going to be really positive applications. But I think part of what we were talking about earlier comes to play again here. We're living in an increasingly malevolent culture, and the point isn't necessarily to have the best ideas, but to have the loudest voice. And if you have a voice that can drown someone else out, then you automatically win.
Yeah.
The same is probably, well, I would argue the same already is true for political advertisements. Political ads have, for a long time, been really harsh.
Yeah.
Back when Jefferson and Adams were running in their second contested elections of 1800, they were saying really awful things about each other. Like really awful things. And these guys used to be close friends. But back then it was just words. There were no images to go along with it. And nothing could go viral. Next year, there's a really good chance that, say, Kristen Gillibrand is the Democratic nominee. There's a really good chance that there'll be some deep fake of Kristen Gillibrand having sex in a concentration camp. Oh, I'm sorry, detention center, with a series of migrant children. I mean, I wouldn't at all be surprised if someone constructed an ad like that.
Wasn't there some hubbub about, I forget if it was Pelosi or Warren appearing like drunk giving a speech or something? I think it was
Oh, yes.
And then, but that's the climate that it's had. So even if someone does do a deep fake, there's going to be a staggering amount of people that automatically have their own narrative that they automatically want to push. It doesn't matter what the evidence is. So
it doesn't.
Almost all of this becomes meaningless in a sense, in a weird way. And it's going to take society a while to catch up to it, I think. But
separating fact from fiction. And to be perfectly honest, we've always had a bit of trouble with that because presidential administrations have consistently blurred the lines between fact and fiction. I'm a U.S. history teacher, sorry. So the Gulf of Tonkin attack that got America into the Vietnam War was an attack that never happened. It literally didn't happen. Because why the hell would North Vietnam attack the United States? They're not stupid. They understood what that would have meant. But it's faked. Americans didn't know it was faked and didn't want to believe it was faked. And even once the evidence was presented, people still didn't want to believe it was faked. Now we have a president who lies overtly and obviously without seeming to suffer any consequences.
Right.
So what's going to stop the next person or the next group of people from, again, inventing their own facts, lying with impunity? I don't know that there's going to be any reason they wouldn't do that. Because like you said, people construct this narrative. They're going to hold on to it regardless of the new evidence or information they get.
And that's like terrifying.
It works.
How
Yeah.
do you take steps, maybe, even going forward or in the past, how do you take steps to maybe start combating that when you're teaching these kids? I mean,
I have lots of little tools in my toolbox, I guess you could say. One of the great things that we do is actually spend time, and shout out to Brian Hamlet, who turned me on to the Stanford History Education Group. They do lots of specific materials that help students basically determine, okay, what does this source mean? How can I put it into a specific context? How can I determine the likely validity of this source compared with this other source? And that kind of comparison shopping, all right, I've got 3 paragraphs. They're all about Indian schools in the 19th century, but from 3 different perspectives. Which of these perspectives do I want to hold on to most? Where are the biases going to be? If it's about Indian schools in the 19th century, there's no real worry for students. There's not any personal connection to that, at least almost never. I mean, we live in Indiana, the land of Indians. Of course there are no Indians here. I think there have been 2 Indians in my school in the past 15 years. Total.
No kidding.
I think that's right.
Wow.
Really nice guys. I like them both.
Yeah.
And a population that just doesn't exist. But they can use those same tools, figuring out, all right, which of these materials makes the most sense, where are the biases I can detect. They can practice when it doesn't mean anything other than a grade and some class time. And they can use those tools when it comes to their actual real lives. That's the kind of thing that I do. I also ask students to look at different kinds of media sources. There are lots of charts that basically determine, all right, where are they on the political spectrum? Are they far left? Are they in the center? Are they far right? Are they somewhere in the margins? Also, what's the level of veracity? How accurate, how truthful are these media outlets? And there are some that are incredibly high on the veracity scale, and some that are ridiculously low. And so I simply provide students with that information and challenge them to go higher and higher on the veracity scale. The problem, of course, is that, especially when I'm dealing with sophomores, there are times when the most accurate sources, like The Economist, are a little bit too difficult for them to read. So then they can go down the scale a little bit, and they're also going down the Lexile scale a little bit, so it's just a little bit easier for them to manage. But those are the kinds of conversations, kind of resources that I actively show students because I want them to understand that people don't always have their best interest at heart.
Right.
Including people that are quite literally paid to, but don't.
Yeah.
That sounds so sad.
But that's kind of the reality that we live in, unfortunately.
It definitely is. It definitely is.
I would argue that your job is probably more important than ever at this point when it's coming in. I mean, you have such a, I love your teaching style, and you had such a great, strong voice. And I think that, you're not afraid to just kind of speak your mind on that sort of stuff. And I'm just trying to figure out a way in my own small part to try and help combat this sort of stuff, because I feel like we have both sides kind of locked in on their own extremes. You have people running over other people. In Charlottesville, you have people hitting other people with bike locks and stuff. There's violence. There's escalating. There was a guy shot the other day trying to firebomb an ICE detention facility or something.
Yeah.
I mean,
he died, right?
Oh yeah.
I thought it.
Yes. Yeah. 69 years old, I think. Okay. And the weird thing is, I don't know. I mean, like, I don't know. It's just like, it's so surreal in a way to see this happening on our own soil. And in even a weirder way, you kind of feel more, and the people I've spoken to feel more disconnected than ever before in terms of just like the reality part of it. Like and I wonder if that's maybe a byproduct of our increasingly technological age. I wonder if that's, something that is...
You're probably right. And I think we're isolated in lots of different ways. I should ask, was Nick Rudisell in your U.S. history class? Do you remember?
Yeah, Nick Rudisell. I remember that name.
Nick is still a very conservative person.
Right.
Was incredibly conservative as a 15-year-old. And this really is an answer to your question.
It's okay. Tell it anyway.
I'm absolutely convinced that Nick knew that I really liked him and I cared about him.
Yeah.
And I really believe that meant, shout out, Nick. It's been probably 2 years since I've seen you. You have to come through university. I'm pretty sure that we were able to have much more connected conversations, even about things where we really had strong disagreements, because we already had the pre-existing connection. I wasn't having a conversation with just some person who has different beliefs. I was having a conversation with Nick, who I really like and respect. And that meant that it was a better conversation for me, a better conversation for him. And it doesn't mean that we necessarily shifted, but that empathy we were talking about earlier, that was there. That was almost, in a sense, built in. Mm-hmm. And I think that the difficulty of having challenging conversations where you're going to disagree often keeps people from having the conversations. But I'm convinced that the difficulty is exactly why we should continue having those conversations.
Right.
If it matters, then it matters. Go ahead, do it. Talk about it. Figure it out as best you can. Recognizing that you're still going to love each other at the end of the conversation. But people kind of shy away from anything that makes them feel uncomfortable or maybe seems like it's going to be difficult. Because after all, I can just go back onto my phone and re-enter the echo chamber.
See, that's kind of the thing, too. And I wonder if maybe it's more difficult as an adult to do that because you're not necessarily placed in that sort of scholastic environment.
Sure.
You are basically sent to your 9-to-5 job in an environment where talking about the wrong kind of politics will get you in trouble with HR. So you kind of keep that to yourself, and then you go home, and then you talk with your spouse or maybe your core group of friends, which typically will all sort of have similar viewpoints. And so that
all
kind of
self-selected.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so then when you have that sort of, you try and find that discourse, you are reaching out to someone online. You're talking back and forth with them, not face to face. You don't see the human behind the words.
Sure.
You just see the words infer their own inflection. You infer their own tone. You probably have this whiny imaginary voice in your head for like the opposite side that you don't agree with.
Of course.
And then so it's just all this hateful, vitriolic sort of stuff. And I think that we would benefit so much from having these kind of face-to-face conversations. And I find for myself is that I lean liberal on some issues. I lean conservative on some other issues. But I find that people like me, I'm having a hard time figuring out where I fall. And I think maybe that's a failing with a two-party system.
One of the many.
Right. But like I don't really know where I fall anymore and that kind of stuff. Like I know where I lean now. Obviously it's liberal, but it's to the left. But like, it's like, hey, you need to stop sitting on the damn fence. You need to pick a side because we're going to war. Like it's some kind of crazy thing.
And that's again is the issue we were talking about earlier of everything being so dichotomized.
Yeah.
Every political issue is either left or right, and sometimes that doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't.
Sometimes what? Why does this group? No, I don't quite get that. Doesn't really make sense, and sometimes it changes.
Right.
So
yeah, I mean, my political leanings have changed. I mean, I grew up in a very Democratic household, and I was like full left on everything. And then the older I've gotten, there's a few issues like like I'm an advocate for gun, not like overtly guns, but I think everyone should have the right to defend themselves. In a perfect world, there would be no guns, but unfortunately, we live in a very flawed world. But like, so for example, like that, like I've kind of gone a little bit to the right on some specific issues, but remain mostly, kind of on the left. So it's just interesting how, people kind of. I think it's healthy for people to maybe sort of evolve as they kind of get older and have a bigger worldview and kind of are exposed to more stuff. Like living in St. Louis, I think for 4 years was probably the craziest, most eye-opening thing for me. And then like going out to LA and just seeing. I mean, I was out in LA 2 months ago, and there were like whole like colonies of homeless people.
Yes.
It was so surreal. Yes. It was like out of a damn like sci-fi movie.
The apocalyptic nightmare.
Yes, and
yes.
I'm like, is this actually America? Like, California's supposed to be this like great place to live. Weather's nice, but traffic sucks. But it's crazy to see.
Well, and apparently the weather is why there's such a large homeless population that's permanent.
Oh,
because you can manage to live outside.
That makes
more
a lot
safely.
of sense. Yeah.
So in Indianapolis, we have colonies, but they're relatively small.
Right.
At least in part because the police break them up so consistently. But it's also quite literally deadly at times to be out on the streets in Indianapolis.
Yeah.
Where's in L.A.? No. My best friend lives in L.A., and I got to visit last February, and 4 glorious days. Sometimes it's really hard to move back to the Midwest.
I know exactly what you mean. It's the saddest plane ride back I think I ever took. And I've taken it before too, so I knew what I was in. I'm like,
you understood. You understood, yes.
And I come back here. It's the weather app says it's the same temperature, but it feels like it's 10 degrees hotter. It's so humid. It's just
absolutely.
Like if I didn't have family and friends here, I don't know, man.
There's a reason California is the most populated state by a country mile.
So if
there are lots of reasons actually, but
well, yeah. I thought that stuff was really interesting. We did. DMT while I was out there. I was interviewing a molecular biophysicist, and we went out there, and I did DMT for the first time. And I had no drug experience or anything like that. Weed was the strongest thing that I smoked, but it was a crazy, eye-opening kind of experience in a really interesting way. But they were talking about how Denver at the time had just sort of recently legalized mushrooms. Or
yes.
Was it legalization or decriminalization? I think it was decriminalized, maybe.
Okay.
But I think that there is a strong, and I'm working on this documentary now, that I think there is a case to be made to get perhaps some scientific eyes or some research studies done on the properties of DMT to maybe see if it could help with mental illness in terms of depression, anxiety. Because I've been pretty outspoken with my own fan base and my following that, when I first wrote this story back in 2010 and kind of was introduced to this weird viral internet fame or whatnot, it was the start of a lot of like depression and kind of like anxiety because of that for me. And I kind of overcame my own depression through diet and exercise and kind of these very specific steps. But the anxiety was something that stayed with me a ton. And I think that for most of my 20s, that was a powerful driving force for me that motivated a lot of what I did in terms of risk-taking or maybe destructive behaviors or just kind of being lethargic. And it's interesting how, again, I don't want to plug my own stuff right now, but for this, for this documentary thing, it's interesting how that, because I have videos that I've done every time I've gone back to the hotel talking about my experience doing DMT and this hallucinogenic experience that kind of really helped put a lot of things in perspective in this world. It's crazy.
Wow.
But yeah, I mean, that's something that we are also seeing. I believe it's in record numbers in our generation of people coming. I don't know if they're coming forward with it because they feel more safe to do it now, or if there's more, or if there's more environmental triggers or what. But we're seeing this such an epidemic, I think, of depression and anxiety. And
my guess is that there's some connection between all of it. And to be honest, I don't really believe that there's an expectation from your generation that you will do better than your parents' generation.
There shouldn't be.
I don't think that.
Yeah, I think that enough time has passed and enough millennials are getting out there to like the home buying age and realizing, holy shit, things are absolutely messed up.
Yes.
I have friends that because, and it's sad, but I have a couple actually that was so obsessed with living this sort of idyllic, what they thought growing up, what they thought was supposed to be this lifestyle of a suburban Carmel house.
Okay.
2 stories, 2 kids, a dog, 1.5 car garage, that they are paying, like they're renting. They're not even owning. They're paying. They're renting this house for like I believe it's $2,400 a month. Okay. They are breaking their financial wallets to try and live this dream that was so easy. I don't want to say easily, but was more realistically attainable for their parents. And it's so wild. I think that with Burbuff, and you probably see this as well, but you kind of seeing people that have maybe had more advantages in general. I know my parents had to struggle to put me through Burbuff, and I'm very grateful for that because it was a really incredible experience. And I think it shaped a lot of who I am today. But, you're seeing a lot of that stuff where people may not, you would think that they would be in a better position to be able to kind of afford all these luxuries, but I'm still seeing the same stuff. Like even these people that have had, affluent parents and all that kind of stuff, like middle class, upper middle class, they can't afford the same sort of stuff that their parents could. And it's like
even people that don't have the massive college debt.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so wild. Like just to I don't know.
Now, this is the best thing about social media for me.
Yeah.
It's that people like you are still somehow in my orbit.
Yeah.
Even after all these years. And every once in a while, I'll see a student and feel like I want to reach out because of something that's less than the idyllic life that's been posted. And the reality is that it's all harder for your generation than it was for mine. It's all harder. The expectations are higher. The expectations of educational and career attainment are higher. The pressure to do it sooner and more perfectly is abundant and very clear.
Yeah.
And there are fewer opportunities.
Yeah.
People are living longer. People have the same kind of job opportunities, and they're holding on to them longer and longer and longer. There are far more women who are in elite levels, and there's an awful lot of younger folks who are getting squeezed out.
Yeah.
I would argue that it started with my generation and deindustrialization. There were fewer ways of having a middle class or upper middle class life, and it's significantly more. That problem has become more significantly more developed for your generation than even for mine.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's refreshing to hear. Someone of your generation say that because, I think a lot of the times there's this kind of bootstrap mentality.
I don't think you're whining.
It's like, come on, listen, for God's sake. It's just really interesting to see and observe. I think there's probably never been a more exciting time to be alive because I'm so curious to see what is going to happen just with our culture that's evolving, our country. Our economic status, it's
and there really are so many possibilities.
Right. Not all of them are bad, too. There's some good stuff that
not at all.
I mean, the machine learning stuff that they're doing in MIT is incredible. But
and I just mentioned how many more people are part of the system and have the opportunity to really make changes. And that really does include people of multiple generations and women and people from all around the world, people have different sexual and gender orientations. A lot of folks who have been shut out in the past now have voices, and that's 100% a good thing. The problem, of course, is figuring out how to make all those voices not just be heard, but appreciated and listened to.
Right.
But the opportunities are there. So, yes, I'm excited about the opportunities.
Right.
I just don't have enough faith that we're going to use them in the right way.
Yeah. I mean,
at least not yet.
Well, we'll
It's
see.
coming.
I
It's
kind of
coming.
I share that sort of pessimism in that regard because it's like let's be honest. Like this is probably not going to happen the way ideally it would work, but
At least not immediately.
right.
At least
think
not immediately.
Time will bore that out one way or the other.
Well,
but.
and we were talking about politics earlier. Obama, of course, the first black person to be president. He was the first black person to be a serious contender for the White House, really.
Yeah.
In 84 and 88, Jesse Jackson ran, and there were lots of black people who were excited about it, but there was no sense that Jesse might actually become president. That wasn't a real thing.
Right.
It doesn't at all seem peculiar right now that there are 4, 5, maybe 6 women who are running for president on the Democrat side. I mean, there are a couple I'm not particularly enamored with, but the fact that it doesn't seem to be an issue is a giant big deal, or not
Yes.
much of an issue.
Yes,
That's
I
a giant
agree.
big deal.
Yeah.
Pete Buttigieg is, in my mind, too inexperienced to become president. Of course, in a general election, if it were he versus Trump, I'd vote for him in a heartbeat.
Yeah, I
But
would too.
and my issue, honestly, is simply that I don't want inexperience to become acceptable when it comes to the most important job in the world. Now,
I would almost argue that we're sort of already at that level, but
we are, but only on one side.
right. This could just be a fluke, and we could go back to normal.
Well, yes.
Fingers
and,
crossed.
And on the left, the folks that are running again and again and again are people, the credible, top-notch contenders
Right.
are again and again and again people that have real experience in government. Excuse me. The Billionaire Boys Club folks, I mean, this is just another opportunity for them to massage their egos. They're not serious contenders. But the fact that someone who's openly gay and married, don't tell the people at Cathedral,
Luke?
seems like a credible candidate.
Yeah.
That's a revolutionary shift as well.
I
So,
agree 100%.
folks in your generation are already way more open than people in my generation, and that feels tremendously exciting. So I can't even imagine 20 years from now what it's going to be like when the expectation is simply that the person matters and all the identity elements are secondary to who the person is.
Right.
That's the whole concept of your character stuff that MLK talked about.
Right.
And it's a slow, long process, but we're moving toward it more quickly than maybe we ever have before.
Yeah.
That's a note of optimism.
It is. It's really cool. It's interesting how, in a lot of ways that Hillary ended up becoming this trailblazer, I guess.
Yes.
In
Yes.
a sense. Even though I wasn't like all the way on board with her, but that's my own personal opinion. But now no one really bats an eye at
Not at all.
seeing all these women up on stage, and it's just like that alone, the good that she did with that
Yes.
alone is fantastic to me. I think that's really awesome.
And
I hope
the reality is that she won by 3 million votes. In every other election, in every other election process anywhere in the world, she'd be the winner.
right.
The person that wins more votes wins. That's just the way it typically works, with this one exception, and it's a really big fucking exception. But yeah, I think there's a chance that 20 years from now she'll be seen as John the Baptist, making the way for
Maybe.
Jesus.
Maybe. I also kind of get why we have the Electoral College in some sense, because I think that a lot of otherwise you get these random states, flyover states that wouldn't really have a voice at all, are sort of, I think, in the
Like
Democratic
Indiana?
process. Yeah, a little bit, or like Wisconsin. Well, no, Wisconsin's a big one, but what about like Idaho? What about those other? No,
Yeah,
not
to be honest, very few of those states have a voice now. In the 2016 cycle, the only reasons that the candidates came to Indiana were for fundraising dinners. They didn't come to campaign.
yeah,
Because very clearly, they can take for granted a certain state, and because you don't have to win by any particular margin, there's not really any incentive for them to explore here. There's a great YouTube video by, I think it's CGP Gray, that explains it's something like the trouble with the Electoral College. He did it before the 2016 election, so it's not Trump specific, but it walks through. I believe that it's right now. I think it was 24% of the population is enough to win the Electoral College. Now,
Really?
it's mathematical.
Right.
So if you win by one vote in Idaho and
I see, yeah.
if you win by one vote in, I think, the 11 biggest states, then you automatically win.
Huh.
It's fascinating.
I'll have to take a look at that. I mean, because granted, that was something I hadn't, on paper you say, well, if you go by the popular vote, then like those states don't have a voice, but I'm sure it's way more nuanced than that. So I'll have to take a look at that video and kind of see. I'm interested in hearing about that. Sure.
And part of what I think would be fascinating about getting rid of the Electoral College is that there are lots of places that might actually be in play that haven't been thus far. So Indiana is absolutely a red state.
Right.
Obama was the only Democrat to win Indiana
yes, he was.
since Lyndon Johnson.
Yeah. I voted for him. I was so proud of
your
it.
first
My
election?
first election. Yeah. I was like, yes.
But Indianapolis is much more blue.
Sorry, I can't search the.
Come on, sir.
Siri, get it together. Indianapolis is much more blue than most of the rest of the state.
Right.
So would Indianapolis actually be a place where folks campaign for votes? Would they actually make an effort here? If it were just about, hey,
see what
there
you're
are
saying.
1.5 million people who live here. We want as many of these people to vote for us as possible.
Right.
Would they actually try to make a stop? But yes, Gray has a really fascinating video about that. And there's something now called the Electoral College Compact. Mm-hmm. The short version is that lots of states, I think maybe 15 now, have agreed that no, I said it's wrong. A popular vote compact.
Okay.
That when enough states get together to sway an election one way or the other, that those states will agree to go with the popular vote winner, regardless of who that person is, in the Electoral College. It's a really peculiar situation.
So what was the YouTube video again? I'll have to look at that. That's
3 initials, maybe it's CPB, CGP, something along those lines.
maybe like the name of the
last
problem with the
thing was
electoral.
Gray.
Last name is
Maybe
Gray.
the trouble with the Electoral College.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll have to look that up.
And Gray has lots of fascinating videos with really good animation and interesting subjects, at least for someone who really likes political science.
Right. I'd be really interested to hear some of your takes. Once
really
we get closer to
interesting. It's really
the
interesting.
Democratic primary.
Absolutely.
When is that, by the way?
Oh my
Is that-
gosh. The process is so long.
I know.
The process is
I feel like they start
painfully
campaigning
long.
earlier and earlier and earlier,
true.
like every
It's true.
election cycle.
Yes. I can't imagine how many times Amy Klobuchar has been in Iowa already.
Yeah.
It's so close to her home state of Minnesota, and boy, I bet she loves all the corn dogs in Iowa. every state, every county fair has the best corn dogs, the best.
The best. Absolute best.
Something like that.
Well, yeah, I think we're running a little bit over. Oh, gosh, we have run a little bit over today. We got to get you out of here. But, Franklin, thank you so much for joining
Absolutely,
me today.
Alec. I appreciate the invitation
Yeah.
and the chance to actually see you in person.
I know. It's been quite a few years.
It has.
What was that? So you do a podcast. Plug your stuff. Absolutely. I'd love to.
Oh, it's the Whodeanny pod, WHODEANNY pod. And as of later this week, I'm going to use Charlie Brown to explain why America is doing a really awful thing as it relates to people entering our southern border.
Oh.
So
Okay.
there's a quick preview.
So Whodeanny Pod. Okay. And is that on iTunes, Spotify? That's
It
what
is. It is.
Okay. Awesome.
All the usual suspects. And what's been really great is that I've been able to have so many beloved students on the podcast.
Oh, no kidding.
So I think the standard expectation is that at the front of the class, I'm supposed to be teaching these students.
Uh-huh.
But this has been a great way for me to get to learn from the young people, which is wonderful. And honestly, should be part of why you do this job as a teacher.
Right. That is so cool.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for having me on.
Yeah.
Definitely appreciate it. And please give Luke my best. I'm glad to have had a chance to meet him.
Absolutely.
This is good stuff. I've heard 2 or 3 of your podcasts so far, and You have lots of really interesting perspectives on things, and
Yeah. I try.
no, that's tremendous. That's tremendous.
I try and get people who I find would be interesting to talk to, and
Yeah.
just challenge myself and challenge Luke, and to
The
try
rebuff
and
motto of open to growth.
Yeah, open
you're,
to growth.
You're living that out.
100%. Well,
Living
thank
it
you.
out.
I try to be at
Absolutely.
least. But you can find me on Twitter at Alexander D. Hall. Facebook is the same for my fan page there. And you can, of course, find the Digital Fireside on Spotify, iTunes, and YouTube. And that'll do it. Thank you so much, and we'll see you guys next time.